everyone to our brief conversation on the relationship that Adverity and Cars.com have created, and the great success and the new ideas that are coming out of all of these great things. So I'd like to introduce myself, and then I'll have Alex Holt introduce himself. I'm Cam Benoit. I'm a solution consultant over at Adverity. I live in New York City. I've worked on tons and tons of data processing and data mining projects in the past, and we're really excited to share some of the insights that we've found and that we think that can be really relevant for you today. So I'll pass it over to Alex, who's going to be really telling his story today. We really wanted to make this about Cars.com and sprinkle in the little portions of what we have with Adverity. So we're really excited to hear him talk and then give our piece on it as well. And Alex, I'll let you introduce yourself and take the presentation away.
Thanks, Cam. Alex Holt, I'm the manager of data enablement at Cars.com. And I'm really excited to cover this topic and really excited to be here at DMWF. This is my first time attending the conference, and it seems like a really great series of programming. So really grateful to be here. When I was thinking about this topic, defining value in a two-sided marketplace, it's sort of the core struggle of what we do at Cars.com and sort of the story of our journey over the past couple of years. And the reason I landed on this topic is that our relationship with Adverity has been a pivotal piece in completing a much larger program of work. And I think that oftentimes, if you consider one of the pieces, it's powerful, but if you consider the business impact of the whole story, you can really see how a vendor like Adverity or a partner like Adverity can come in and really enable you to move quickly through a very complex process. So some things I'm hoping to achieve today, are to set up the problem that we were trying to solve before we ended up working with Adverity, and the solution. And the problem, I'm going to talk about a few different pieces. One is just what is a marketplace, for any on the call who might not be familiar. I'm sure many of you are. I'm going to talk a little bit about the traditional approach to marketplace acquisition marketing, and I'm going to talk about the major gaps that we saw in that approach. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about how we solved those gaps using data architecture, data science, and then data enablement, which is really the crux of my role. But we had to tackle all three in order to make it through this program. So starting off, what is a marketplace? For those of you, Cars.com is an American business. We only operate in the US. So for any of you who are not familiar, it is an online marketplace. Think Kpis or something like that, where sellers, which are the car dealers, and consumers, who are the car purchasers like you and me, show up, and the sellers list their inventory on our site, and we get 30 to 35 million hits a month on our site from consumers who are looking to purchase that inventory. So our site is purely the meeting place of a two-sided marketplace comprised of sellers and consumers. And the definition of our success on a marketplace like that is the match, right? It's the ability of both the seller and the consumer to find the counterpart to the transaction that they're wanting to initiate. So we're really looking to be the place where they meet, and our job is to make sure the right two parties meet. And so that's kind of how we think about our business. And if you're not in a marketplace business, this approach, this framework that I'm going to talk through, it can be used for anything that deals with an offline conversion. Right? Because we're dealing with a set of marketplace interactions that are incredibly complex, and right in the middle of it is the conversion, and that's mostly what online businesses with offline conversions deal with. It's a form fill, it's a newsletter sign up, it's a profile creation. It's something where you're taking an action, but then downstream of that is an offline conversion that really is the value piece of the transaction. So if you're not in a marketplace business, but you do deal with an offline conversion, I hope that this framework for thinking about this problem will be helpful to you as well. So walking through a little bit about what this whole funnel or this whole transaction looks like in the car buying process, right? You're starting with consumer intent, as with most things. And those are shoppers on the internet or off the internet who are deciding to make a purchase. And for us, it's cars, right? So you have somebody who, for instance, in the current climate isn't comfortable taking public transportation, doesn't own a car, usually uses public transportation to get around, but has decided that's not really a safe option. So they're making the choice to be in market. And then the pieces that we normally see, right, are shopping behavior. They're logging onto a site like cars.com, and they're doing some research. They're looking at different vehicles. They're sort of doing comparative pricing. They're looking at features. They're reading editorial content. It also could be calling dealerships, calling friends, talking to their family about what cars they own. So this shopping behavior, while we see a lot of it, there's also, a lot that we don't see. And then you move, at least in our universe, into the conversion. And in our universe, that's the traditional form fill. I want to hear about this car. I'm going to give you my phone, my email address, and my name, and whatever other information I feel like I want to give you. And I'm going to submit that to cars.com, and cars.com is going to pass that on to a dealer. And then there's, the in-store experience that is sort of necessary unless you're working with a partner like, purchasing a car online, which is still kind of a new thing that not a lot of consumers are comfortable with, but it's certainly showing up in the market. But for us, really, you're dealing with an appointment. We pass on that packet of PII to a car dealer. They call you, they email you and say, hey, please come in and look at this 2008 Toyota, whatever. And then if that appointment goes well, you have a purchase, you have a transaction. So the traditional approach to this whole funnel from the perspective of a marketplace business is usually like this. The only thing we see is your shopping behavior on our platform. We don't know anything about you. If you're a new user, we don't have a cookie, we don't have a login, we don't know anything about you, and you're just showing up on our site, new visitor, hit 1 in Google Analytics or Adobe. And then we're looking at what you're doing on our site, and we're just trying to sort of guide you through with our experience, and that can mean a lot of different things, but we're trying to guide you through to the conversion. We're trying to get you to fill out that form, because what we historically think of our role as being is just getting leads for dealers, right? It's just a pure volume play. We're saying we need to get as many conversions to these dealers as possible, or whatever your conversion might be, right? But it's a volume play. We see the shopping behavior, we can sort of model out what we think the best conversion rates are going to be, and we're going to make site optimizations to increase those conversion rates, and we're going to try to get you to submit the lead. And that sort of leads us to traditional metrics like a cost per volume of something, cost per visit, cost per sign up, cost per lead. And that's certainly how cars.com did it for a long time. And for a long time, that was kind of the only option you had, right? 4 or 5 years ago, there wasn't a lot of visibility into what beyond the conversion, was happening. And so we sort of stuck on these cost per lead metrics. But there's, as you can imagine, and maybe some of you have already solved this, but there's some big problems with that. And the first one is that the volume does not necessarily equal the value, right? Simply targeting the volume or the cost delivery doesn't actually mean that the car dealer is selling more cars. An easy example, I deliver you 1 lead on someone who wants to buy a $50,000 car. They are ready to go, and they purchase that car 3 days later. They show up for their appointment. They already are pre-qualified for financing. They buy that vehicle. Now look at another dealer. I deliver you 100 leads on an antique Mustang or some sports car. All these people might just be curious about the sports car. They're not people who are actually going to buy this $150,000 1975 car. They're just curious about it. In a cost per volume situation, we are going to proof positive say that the guy who got 100 leads, or the dealer who got 100 leads, is in a much better place than the person who got 1 lead. But in the actual transaction, that's not true. So that kind of hits at my second point, which is your measure in the cost per volume world is less than the reality of your transaction. And one of the things I really want to hit home is that when you're measuring success, one of the key components is that your measurements should accurately and elegantly capture what success looks like in the real world, not just on the platform, not just in the ad platform, and not just in meetings where you're talking about the same cost per metrics over and over again. One of our biggest enemies to success, at least at Cars, can be the same metrics we've reported all the time. Well, we need year over year, we need this or that. And that can be good for stability and reporting, but for true optimization, right? What we're doing is often the enemy of what we could be doing. So the solution, rather than just looking at the volume and are we getting the transaction, is to make sure that marketing is bringing the right parties to the right transaction at the right time to create the most value. And if you want to do that, you need to understand all of those parts of your equation. Who is the right parties? Who's the right consumer for the right seller? What is the right time to transact? What is value? You need to be able to define all those things if you want to do that. But I think if you take that to any person who deals with an offline conversion, I think that they would probably say that that's exactly what they want. They just can't get there. But that's really what they need. They just don't maybe feel like they have the architecture or the measurement that they can actually define all of those pieces. So this was essentially the problem when we started looking for a partner like Adverity that we were trying to solve, is how do we define all of this? How do we get all our data together and really get through it? And the first step is data architecture. We needed to understand all the pieces of the transaction that we didn't have. We knew what was happening on our site. We have hundreds of, props and evars in Adobe. We have tons of custom dimensions and metrics in GA. We use both concurrently. We had tons of data about what was happening. But we didn't have what was happening off the site. And there's some major sources you can go to that worked well for us. One is third-party data. There's always somebody collecting data on something that's happening in the world. For us, for instance, it could be new car registrations. Someone has that data and they can tie it back to PII, and maybe they have a 30 or a 50% match rate, but they know some group of people that is completing the success action. Go out and find who that is and invest in that. It can be expensive, but it's totally worth it. So looking for third-party data sources is really key, and finding the ultimate point of your transaction and getting validation data there. Also, partnerships with trade organizations in the car world. We don't necessarily, we know what the dealer is going to sell the car for, but we don't really know what their profit's going to look like. They're not just selling a $50,000 car and getting $50,000. They have costs. They bought that car for a price, they're selling it for a price, and have overhead. So going to trade organizations, say, what's the actual margin they're making? Because what we're trying to do is make sure the profit from the dealership justifies their spend with our business. And that means we need to understand that. So trade organization partnerships have been a valuable piece of getting that information for us. And finally, customer allies. It's not crazy to go to your customers and say, hey, what is and is not working? You're really trusted long-term relationships, and figure out, hey, who's actually showing up for the appointment? Who's actually purchasing the vehicle? What leads are they? Can we stitch those back to our sources and our channels and figure out what we're doing there? And then by understanding all of those pieces, can we start to understand intent? Before the consumer actually does an action, can we understand what they're likely going to be looking for based on the success data? So going out and getting your data is crucial. And then really, we went through that. That was a very business development type problem, but now we've got this huge world of data. And it's like, how do you actually take all that channel data and the offline data and the customer data and the survey data and all that stuff and put it together in an error-free and rational way that the business can use? And this is actually the flow that I built in Tableau Prep as like a V.1 of what our data process could look like. And it was huge, it was unwieldy, it was not automated, and it was a huge problem for our business. And we just couldn't move past this for a while. And if we can't move past getting it all together and getting it clean, you really can't action on the data. And that's where Adverity really stepped in and saved us in this process. So I'll pass it over to Cam to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And the truth is that Alex and his team did an incredible job with the tools that they had in those scenarios. But what we want to talk about now is kind of the automated assembly line for your data, right? So you're getting whatever data you would like, wherever you would like it, however you would like that data, right? So what we want to talk about here is some of the simple differences from what we saw cars doing before, that whole spider web of different tasks and information and systems, now into what we're looking at here, as well as what we see all over the place, right? I have these conversations with people every single day to start to understand their specific processes. So the first part of this process on the left side is the actual connections to the data sources that you want, right? So with Adverity, the difference here is that you're doing these things through wizard-driven connectors that take minutes to complete, instead of waiting a very long period of time, like weeks or usually months and sometimes even years, for these connections to be built for you. The second part in the middle here is actually the enrichment of the data, where if you need to add in different things add in different fields, create different calculated KPIs, or do anything that's going to make that data more useful for people that are going to be using it downstream. That's what you're able to automate in here, right? Taking out all of those VBA models or Python that we're developing right now. All of those things are going to be automated for you. And then finally, the last part here where we're actually transferring this information over to its final destination, you can either go on the top part there where you can go to Verity Augmented Analytics, and that's going to provide you with two major things, right? It's going to give you really terrific performance on dashboards as well as machine learning algorithms, right? So this can go all the way straight through the data from your database to a dashboard being updated every single day for you and ready for those meetings and giving you those insights that are important for you. Now, we've also, and I recommend going back and watching Gavin England's presentation that he did yesterday on Augmented Analytics. You can dig into the machine learning algorithms that we found that are useful for everyone. It's a great base for what people are doing, and then you can go out and do the more specific stuff that you'd like to as well. So the second portion on the bottom here is exactly what Alex did. He went to a third party, he put the data into a database, but all of that pre-work was done for him at the beginning stage. That's really what helped him out. So as we go into the next slide here, what's important to note is that as I've been the technical project leader for some of the largest data processing, data mining projects in the entire world, what I've found is, and I ask myself a question, is what are making people really successful and what's really a roadblock for a lot of people mentally if they want to be successful with these different processes. And it's a really simple difference between perception and reality. Right here, what we can see is the perception. Everyone that we meet with, or the vast majority of people that I've met with, hundreds of different people, have said that our process is very, very unique. And it might not be able to actually be aided by digital logic or automation of any kind, because these people have learned it over years and years and years, and only these people know how to do it, and we need to follow this exact guide. Now, this is a huge problem that I've seen a lot of people fall into in this scenario. So now as we switch from the perception into the next part of the actual reality, what we're seeing here is that the reality is that the vast majority of these processes are not unique. These are things that everyone's doing with maybe slightly different connectors and maybe slightly different transformations. But when you have a platform like Verity to build these things out, to adhere to all those specifics for you on that non-unique portion of your business, you can double down on the second portion of that, where you can really focus on what makes your business unique, right? So when you automate all of those unique portions, you can increase the progress further, right? We're starting to see that the goalposts are being moved a little bit further back. We're talking about Alex getting really quality leads and just instead of just the volume of leads. And then finally, you can start to get results like we've seen at Cars and some of our other clients here. So the first thing that we're seeing here is that they did the goal that we see of almost every single one of our clients. It's consolidating all of that data across all of their different platforms in an automated way. Now that comes into the second portion, and I heard that someone was talking about how they cut the another company that's similar to what Verity does was talking about how they cut the time that the manual processing has been done for all of their data processing down by half, right? What we were able to do at Cars.com is very different than that. So what we did is we cut it in half at the beginning, and then we cut it in half again, and then we cut it in half 3 more times to get it to a place where some of these things are more like tweaks and it's more preference-based. So it used to be over 100 hours of work a week down to a single digit of work a week. So these things have a really significant impact on your business. And then the third portion of this is the actual results that they're looking for. So Alex did a great job of explaining how his business makes money and how they go to market every single day. So when they're saying that they wanted to increase the amount of sales leads, and they also had a really big priority for return on ad spend, they weren't just able to increase those things. In some places, they were actually able to double those numbers. And it's really that main focus on automating that non-unique portion of your business and that process, and then really doubling down on that second part, those things that are really important for people to work on. And that brings me into that last portion of the value that Cars got from Adverity. So it's really to focus on the work that matters. And this is really two prongs. So the first portion of this is that when people aren't doing these monotonous tasks, they have a little bit more meaning in their work. They bring a little bit more passion to it. And they do a better job. They also develop great skills for the future, and they become very marketable on the job market as well. And the second portion is really what I've been talking about this entire time. It's automating that first portion of what we might think is unique, but the reality is that everyone is doing that same first portion at the beginning, and a lot of people are choosing to automate that because they can double down on that second portion there. And as we transition back over to Alex, I do want to bring up the fact that we're very confident in our software. If those were results that were interesting to you, there's a lot of opportunities throughout this conference to engage with account executives, as well as either just going to adverity.com and hitting that big orange button to set up a free consultation or a free demo or even a free trial where we'll go in, connect to those data sources, transform that data in a way that you want it, and then shoot that data over to the location that you'd want it as well. And as we transition back to Alex, I do want to, Rachel, I would love to pick up the question that we have on seeing, do people actually think that this data collection is a significant bottleneck in their current process? Because the reason why Adverity became a company is because we recognize that all of these different players have been doing the exact same thing every single week or every single day to actually try to accomplish these different things. So what we've done is try to create a platform that supports people on those endeavors. And what I'd like to do now is actually shift it back over to Alex, and he's going to be talking about what really matters for Cars.com and the reason that he got to why it matters at Cars.com and why he's really been an industry leader with him and his team so far. So Alex, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, couldn't have said any of that better myself. It really was incredibly easy. You know, when I scoped and pitched this project using Adverity, everyone thought, oh, it's a 3 to 6 month ramp up period. It's going to take a whole team. I shopped it out internally. And my data engineering team was telling me it would take 6 months to a year to build in-house all the API connectors we needed. And realistically, we were up and running in about 45 days. And Adverity built for free any API that they didn't have in their bank for us. So not only did we get in the engagement an immediate start, but we also got a lot of custom development that, quite frankly, they did way faster than our internal teams thought was possible. So really jumped us through to this next step, which is doing some data science with all this data. You know, you've got your site data, you've got your consumer intent data, you've got your success metrics data. It's all together in one place. And the thing about data science is that your models are a direct product of the quality of your data and your ability to define as a business the outcomes you want. So if you don't have somebody like Adverity who's making all of that data very clean and stable, your models won't be able to run. I mean, those more null values you have in your data tables and the more rows that are hitting errors and stuff, your models are not going to be successful. So it was really pivotal for us to make this jump efficiently, quickly, and in a stable way. So if you're embarking on data science, if you're new to using data science, we certainly were. We have an incredible team. And what they will tell me time and time again is to clean our data and hone our business strategy. And if we can do those two things, we can model any outcome that we want to achieve. And then, as you'll see later, we can pass it back into ad platforms and automate it, right? So if you want to think about inputs and outputs, if you're creating models in our value life cycle, in the life cycle of our transactions, some of the inputs we use are survey data from consumers, asking them what they're looking for from our site. It's thin data, but it is really powerful. You've got obviously really robust shopping and conversion data. I mean, just those two things alone, we've got something like 120 different features in our models that just address shopping and conversion behavior. So really making sure your implementations of a site analytics tool are really robust and you're capturing all of the dimensions you can. Then for things like appointments, we can use customer metrics, who did and did not show up. You can create great lead nurturing tools with some vendors who can give you some information about who and who is not showing up and start to validate that data. Mostly we use our customers for this. And then finally, our third-party data, who purchased and who didn't. And so if you put all of those inputs together into your sort of foundational data for your models, some outputs you can expect starting from the left are you can model consumer intent. You can understand when that user shows up, what are they looking for? You can model their shopping experience and say, based on what they've done so far, what do they need to do next to be a quality shopper? Or what do they need to see next to go from an evaluator to a purchaser? Or what car do they want to see that will actually have the best chance at converting to a sale downstream? Those are really powerful outputs for both media buying, audience creation, and site personalization. And then you can also model out likely appointments and likely sales. And that's a way you can really get to what do we believe the value our customers are getting from our platform by modeling out the value in sales we expect them to see. And what you end up from all of this is we've actually ended up with 4 or 5 models. I've sort of picked a few here that really all need to play well together to achieve this, right? The first one is a CLTV model. It's a customer lifetime value. We think of that as being the dealer, right? What do they need and when? What cars do they actually need to sell versus what could they hold on to or let sort of collect some more leads and really get some more qualified shoppers before we start hammering them in with low funnel shoppers. What dealers are relatively having difficult times selling cars in certain markets. If you have 2 identical cars, how can we make sure that there's some level of fair treatment if one person is getting disproportionate value? We don't cap value, but we can certainly use the marketing spend as like I think of it as a bit like the Fed. We have people in a market who are going to be contributing a certain amount of money into the marketplace and they're going to get a certain amount of value. Some people are going to get an incredibly high value for their money. Some are going to get a low value for their money. And our marketing efforts can be a way to just ensure that there's some baseline consistency in the value we're providing our customers. Not that we're taking from either portion, but we're just guiding our marketing spend to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of value in the marketplace. In order to do that, you also need quality scoring. You really need to understand who's going to buy what and when. So you end up with a quality model, right, of your visits and of your leads. And then you have a best match algorithm, which is saying, okay, given the CLTV and the quality score, who needs to meet and when? How can we create an SRP experience that can really facilitate a match that is the best for both parties? And if you understand all of that, what you can actually arrive at is a transaction value. And that's the e-commerce portion that I put in the title of this slide, is you can actually value each of those based on the value that they will create in the real world. And this is not a selfish cars.com value thing. This is how much we expect to be created in the market. That is the actual end of our transaction. And that's where your measure starts to equal your reality. And you can actually get at a value. And you're creating value in the market, which is really the goal. And how you do that, once you have your models built, and there's a lot in there, I know I'm blowing over a ton of incredibly technical detail that we could have a whole separate seminars about each one of those different models and how we did them. But again, this is meant to be a framework and a bit of a guide to the things you can think about if you haven't gone through this process. And once you have them, and again, there's a lot that goes into that, but say you get to that point, which you can because your data is clean and automated, right, through Adverity. The last piece is the enablement of that data. And this is my living and breathing every day. And I kind of look at data enablement as actually having 3 components. One is the pure enablement. What I think about that is, okay, you've got your values, you've got your scores. Where do they go? They're, for us, they're housed in our data warehouse. They are pushed, they're sort of developed through Adverity, pushed into our data warehouse. Some modeling is done in the data warehouse in various environments that we've built. And then it's pushed to enablement platforms like Google Analytics. We use a couple of different ones. Google is just really easy to get a lot of their different products into very small spaces, like with GMP. So I sort of highlighted that there. But enablement can look like correct tag implementations, using when to use a container versus a floodlight versus remarketing tag, and making sure your architecture is set up properly on your site. This is enabling things like enhanced e-commerce, right? If you were just dealing with lead volume and now you're dealing with transaction values, you can enable those e-commerce functionalities and start to see the funnel and start to understand the relative value of all of your different transactions. This is posting custom data to things like GA using data importation or measurement protocol posts on the client side. And this is custom data feeds for partners like Facebook, prioritized using your transaction values or modeled outcomes. So it's really funneling the data in usable ways to your partners. Then once it's there, there's the activation piece. Again, GMP, just easy to get it all on one little slide. We use a bunch of partners. I'm sure you all do too. But this is where you're doing your A/B testing. This is where you're doing your cookie splits where that's possible. This is where you're doing your conversion lift experiments. This is where you're testing ad copy, building audiences. Quality scores, for instance, are great for audience building. You can't really buy off them. Whereas a transaction value, you can start to use smart algorithms like TROAS within Google Ads to start getting their algorithm to notice what your value is. And now you don't have to create specialized campaigns all over the place. You can actually just tell Google, hey, optimize the value, and they'll go out and do it, thinking that you're running an e-commerce campaign when maybe you're not. Or maybe it's a modeled outcome, not an actual product. But you can hack functionalities like that to get Google to recognize for you where are the geographies where you need more value, where are the makes and models in the car universe where you need more value. So making sure you're using the full extent of all of these platforms. Using something like Google Optimize, you can do some personalization and on-site experience testing. So this is really that activation layer of making sure you are using every platform to its fullest to get them to create the value for you, so you're not having to do all the analysis and segmentation and tactical implementation yourself. In my experience, platforms, simpler is always better. Every really great mentor I've had in running ad campaigns, you look at them and they are at least business simple. They might look complex, but the business logic is really simple. And I think that's what some of these things enables. It's basic audience, it's basic ROAS, bit on that. And then the last piece, right, once you've done all of that, is you're doing your measurement. You're doing your cohort analyses, you're looking at churn and retention, you're looking at doing regression analyses to see if there are features to your models that you may have missed that you want to implement in future versions, right? You're looking at significance testing. Is this TROAS thing getting us, a little bit or a lot more revenue? And you're looking at incrementality. Is it actually, when it's optimizing for this value, are you getting net new, or are you just retargeting the same users over and over again and creating a closed loop? Doing those types, especially with the cookies going away and privacy getting so much more difficult to get around, things like significance, incrementality, and causal lift, really, really important to understand when you're doing things that have a value, right? Is it incremental revenue, or is it just the same money over and over again, getting sort of caught in your system? Attribution, where it's possible, can really be helpful. Even doing custom attribution modeling using something like a Markov chain packet in R or Python can be really helpful if you have good channel data. And then I put Asana up here, and I'll close on this because the key of this is getting your ad platforms to recognize the true value you're trying to create in the market and bidding based on that. That's the end state. And if you're not walking into your boardroom or your departmental meeting and you're saying, hey, we achieved X outcome with this new metric, and it's not making sense to your CEO, or it's not making sense to the CMO, who might be a brand-focused person and really is just thinking in broader terms, right? If they're not lighting up at what you're saying, it's time to go back to the drawing board, because the whole point of this, it sounds complicated, but it's to get to the simple fact that your offline conversion has a relative value. Not all of them are created equal. And if you're able to express that in a way that makes sense to your business owners, that's the key. It should ladder up to all of your organizational goals and really create true value in the world. And that's really what we're trying to do. This is one approach. There are many. That's a lot of information to throw at you, but I hope this gives you a good idea of how we thought about this whole movement from volume to value, how we took some of the pieces and executed on them, and how choosing high quality partners who really can move quickly, scalably, and reliably can make the entire difference in your ability to execute a program like this in 9 months, not 3 years. And 9 months is about what we were able to do this whole thing in. It took a lot of people, but it is doable. And if you're not thinking like this, I would just encourage you to start now, because the benefits really are there, not just for you, but for your customers and your consumers and for everyone you're interacting with. So with that, I know it's a lot. I'm sure there are tons of questions. I'll hand it over to Cam to sort of shoot some of those out. But I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us talk today, and hopefully you found something valuable.
Alex, thank you for sharing that story. I think that's really inspirational to a lot of people who might be in the middle of trying to accomplish what you folks have already. And the fact that you've been able to do that in such a short amount of time is pretty incredible. So I appreciate that. And then I do want to jump into a few questions here. Alex, if you do see any ones that you like, feel free to jump in on those, but I think I'll take a couple and maybe we'll have a conversation about a few. So Alex, I know that you had said something about this before, but the first question that we got was what happens when you need a new connector? So from just the generic answer that that we would provide and the service that we provide our customers is that when they need a new connector, if there's API documentation out there, we're happy to go look at it. And in the general rule, we can go out and actually build those connections for you as long as there's some sort of API documentation. So Alex, have you actually had to request to build any new connectors? And if so, how did that go with Adverity?
Yeah, super simple. The only things they ever asked me for are credentials to hit the API. They asked me for documentation for the API from the vendor. So one is Iterable, which is who we use for our email service provider. It was a connector that didn't exist before. And we reached out to the email channel manager, said, hey, can you reach out to your connection at the vendor and just get the documentation of their API, set up some unique credentials for them, and then provide a sample report of what we want the data, the raw data, to look like, unless we just want a full API call. Once we have those three pieces of information, I send it over to Petra, who is my account lead, and she's really efficient. And we've done 4 of these, I think. The fastest one probably got done in about 2 weeks. The longest one maybe took a month. They do one at a time, but there's been no incremental cost, and I've never heard from anybody who's requested a connector that it was complicated or difficult. It's always sort of within 2 to 4 weeks, pretty simple.
That's incredible. Yeah, we have there's behind the scenes, there's an army of people that are working on those things. Our CEO actually made an announcement that he's hiring 45 new people, and I got really excited because I was like, oh, we're gonna get more consultants. This is gonna be light work. And he goes, yeah, so we're hiring 43 new developers and 2 consultants and a salesperson.
Yeah, so that is my 100% experience with Adverity. It's one of the few, I hate to use this example, but it's like the 2007 Apple of something like this. It's so much invested in the engineering and the user experience that we interviewed other vendors who did this, and it looked like an MS-DOS console. It was just highly code-based, really technical. And I knew I was going to hire Adverity when we logged into the platform. And I'm like, this looks like, iTunes or something. I mean, it's really sleek, very simple to use. And it's so clear that it's one of those rare examples where you can use incredibly high-level development to influence great design and make it really easy for the user. So my boss, who was very resistant to onboarding a vendor at all, he got a demo for Adverity and immediately signed the PO. I mean, it was really that easy. So I'm glad to hear you're hiring more devs.
That's incredible. And then we also have, let's see what the next question is here. So what do we do if we're trying to create new data from the data that we already have? And maybe we can answer this one really quickly. In this scenario, what we do a lot of is create calculated KPIs. So if we're combining the information that we already have, or using that in different time series, or going out and adding new fields into the columns, or going in and taking columns out. One really common example of something that's really useful for people downstream is that if you're looking at something like Facebook calling something spend, and that's one column over here. And then you have Google saying that, oh, I really think that's actually supposed to be called cost. What you can do with Adverity is make sure that those things are in the same column. So that's going to allow you to actually compare those things apples to apples. And then with any calculations that you need to do, with any development work that you need to do to make sure it's what you actually are looking at and what you're desiring in that final state, are absolutely things that you can do within our platform. And we've done this for some of the largest companies in the world, and we have the scale to do that.
Yeah, one of the tools that we've used, trying to think of my own use case, right? For instance, one of the easy questions at the beginning is, what's our cost per lead? You've got 13 different platforms you're using. You've got your own internal source of truth for leads, which doesn't necessarily match up to the platforms, but you need the spend from the platforms, your leads and your visits from your internal data. How do you get that all to a simple campaign level cost per lead, cost per visit? One of the things we used is called a blended data stream. So you do have the ability to go in, transform and roll up all of the individual data sets to basically campaign, time period, and cost. There's a really, if you're non-technical, there's a very simple step-by-step sort of transformation editor. If you're more technical, you can write custom Python, which is also super powerful in each of your data sources. And then once you have each of the individual data sources at the right level, you can use a blended data source to put them all together. And then you can do, like Cam said, some calculated metrics. So there are some duplicative row counting. So like it does treat it as querying your old data. So there is a little bit of architectural need to be really efficient when you're doing that. But it is totally possible to do that. And we certainly have done that with a lot of effectiveness. Although as we've gotten more robust, you also want to be cognizant of, what am I doing in Adverity and what am I doing in my data warehouse? Where's the appropriate place for that? And sometimes it's true that just a table script is better for some complex calculations, depending on the granularity you're doing them at. So, but we've never run into an issue where we couldn't do it using the architecture.
Wonderful. And then we did touch on this one already. It looks like James is asking how did the implementation go?
Yeah, like I said, the easiest way to say it is we used to have 3 analysts working full time just to maintain this architecture. We had a core analytics group, we had a marketing analytics group. Within 60 days, we had basically taken all of the reporting off of the plate of the marketing analysts. And this was pretty much 100% automated, maybe down to 5 hours a week of just sort of tweaks and upkeep time, down from 3 FTEs worth. We did not hit any roadblocks. We were live with V1, I think, within a week, and it replaced 80% maybe of what we were doing. Support was incredibly high touch. There was nothing. If I didn't know how to do something, I'd contact support and they'd do it for me in less than 24 hours, pretty much every time. And they'd explain to me exactly how they did it. And then the sort of 3-month result is basically we were able to centralize the analytics team because it was so much less unique than we thought it was. We were actually able to absorb into one analytics group that services the enterprise, which was way more efficient. And that ended up being 1 to 2 analysts, and the other sort of lead analysts, including myself, were actually moved to other areas of the organization. And in my case, at least, I ended up getting promoted, which was pretty sweet. So I think it was the version of the implementation that no one internally thought was going to happen. I mean, it was the pie in the sky. Okay, maybe if this goes perfectly, it will look like this. And it's pretty much how it ended up working, which was kind of unbelievable, but it's how it worked.
Yeah, that's a great story to have. There's tons and tons of stories out there where people have said, oh, the salespeople have promised me everything in the world, and that's a big reason why we've really shift from being, we were never salespeople that really would just promise the world and not talk about things and show you how to do them. In a lot of these scenarios, before we start an implementation, what we'll do in a lot of scenarios is actually connect to your data sources, actually show you some of those transformations. If you want to do some visualizations as well, those are all things that we want to make sure are good for you and that you're comfortable with as well. So I'm glad that you had that experience, Alex. that's really exciting, and I think that's something that's really important for other people to hear. And then just kind of jumping through these other questions, I think we're coming towards the end. It looks like Betsy asked directly to Alex, could you provide some examples of third-party data that you used and how you use some of that third-party data?
Yeah, I think as a last question, I can be brief about that. Obviously, with these particular types of agreements, I'm hesitant to share the partners that we use in the specific structure. But basically what we're using is there's a couple of different vendors who collect data about car registrations and sales. Some of it comes from car manufacturers, some of it comes from independent reporting bodies. You can think like credit organizations often log if people have purchased a car. That gives you a path to go down. But basically what we're doing then is we are hashing all the PII, stitching a binary yes, no, 0, 1, did this result in a purchase? And then we're attaching that to the user record of the sessions. And then we are dropping the PII and running a model on that. So by the time we actually use the data, there is 0 1-to-1 matching. We do not look at PII level data for privacy reasons, but we are able basically to use it as a predictive model for every future lead. But basically we send PII, it gets matched, it gets hashed, it gets sent back, we stitch it to our user records, and then we drop the PII.
Wonderful. And yeah, I appreciate that those things should also be covered up a little bit. So terrific answer on that one, Alex. So now we're starting to close up the webinar. Again, we just want to review the results of the question that we asked before, and then we can start to wrap it up. And again, thank you folks so much for joining. This is an incredible story that we want everyone to know about how Adverity can help people out in the greater, more important vision that people can now focus on. So now the results that we're looking at here, and the question was, how many of you feel like data collection is a bottleneck? And if so, how severe, right? So what we've seen here is it looks like about 36, the majority here has said it's extremely severe, which is terrific. We have about 32% that said somewhat severe, 29% was neutral, and then 4% was not too severe, and then 0% was not severe at all. So I think that what we were able to see from that poll is very simple. It's just the fact that these are problems that a lot of people are facing. And sometimes when we think that we have these very, very unique processes and we can't fix them at all, maybe those are the people that are a little bit neutral or not too severe. We really want to look into those things, and we're happy to do a free consultation or have people come in for conversations to really push forward the way that you folks are processing data right now, so you can really focus on what's more meaningful. So Rachel, at this point, I just want to say, I'll let Alex finish up as well, but I want to say thank you so much, Alex, for sharing your story, and thank you so much for everyone listening today. I thought this was an incredible webinar.
Yep, and if any of you guys have any questions, my email address is there. I'm very happy to answer questions or schedule some follow-up calls if anyone just has something we didn't get to. But just really a joy to be able to speak on this topic today. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I really, there are a few partners that I would jump on and do something like this with, and Adverity is certainly one of them. So I cannot recommend them enough, and I really appreciate the chance to say that to all you guys. So thanks so much.